Should be us now. Hello, hello.
Hey everybody.
We went from 4 minutes to
2 minutes
on
to now. Okay.
to immediately on. Tried to do that countdown thing, but
it didn't work. So we're starting early. Well, 30 seconds early. So
we'll give you all time. We can count down together.
Yeah.
29, 28, 27.
So, good evening,
You're
everybody.
up on that screen. There you go.
Yeah. So welcome to Thursday night.
See if
Welcome
we
to
can
our
find
study.
us there.
And I think we're there.
Here we are. It's 20 seconds behind, honey. So,
Oh, okay. So
they're seeing it.
So
or they'll be seeing this in 20 seconds.
In 20 seconds.
Okay.
Well, glad you're here.
There
we are. Ta-da! Glad to see you all tonight.
Hey, Vicky.
So Vicky's on board. Hey, Vicky.
And Brian. Oh, good. Thanks for counting down with us.
Counting down, Brian. So, all right, here we are.
I tried to get fancy and do that countdown screen, but I don't know. I'll have to get another tutorial on that.
Right. It's Thursday night, and we are in studio, and you're out there in cyberspace, and
Glad
it's our
to see you
Genesis
guys.
study. Obviously, it's our Genesis study. There we go. Let me get right down there. Ta-da. Okay, it's our Genesis study, and tonight we are going to be covering chapter 43.
So do me a favor, and I'm doing it right now. Click like and share. Share this feed because we want as many people out there to join in on studying from the Word, right?
Exactly.
As much as possible. So
great.
let's
And
do
Miss
it
Polly's
now.
on board.
Do it now.
Thanks
it now.
for joining
hey.
us, Miss Polly. So,
Good to see you guys. Okay,
so-
let me make this. I have to make it bigger again so we can see what's
there
going
we
on.
go.
Haha.
Glad everybody's coming on. So if you have your Bibles, if you would turn to chapter
Polly.
43 in the book of Genesis, and I think while we're waiting for people to sign on, I'm going to go ahead and put that up. So just to
Dan-
kind of
Oh, I didn't have it. See, this was a live shot. So
There we
now
go.
that's the live shot.
there we are.
You want me to make it the big?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So Dan wants to go
All
to the
right.
big map with a camel in it.
Right. I found this kind of cool map. It's just a fun map, but it's also
Hi, Angie.
very informative. Hey, Miss Angie.
Angie.
And Miss Catherine's
And
on board.
Catherine, Texas.
So great.
Hey.
So
Howdy.
this map, because as we're going to see, it talks about a widespread famine. It said the whole earth, but it probably wasn't the entire earth, but
Well, it said like on all the land.
all the land.
Which
so,
is a large area.
so if you look up, I don't know if you can see my little mouse moving up there, but
Yeah, you need to make that bigger.
yeah, not going to happen right now.
I know, but you could.
But sort of
make it
at the
bigger
end of
someday.
this red arrowed line here, that's approximately where Jacob and his very large family are residing, the land of Canaan. Some ancient manuscripts call it Phoenicia, okay, but it's the land of Canaan. That's what the Bible calls it. And then Joseph is way down here, and I guess what would that be, about the 9 o'clock position, where all those red lines converge in the land of Egypt. Distance-wise, it's somewhere between 200 to 300 miles, maybe longer, depending on the route that they have to take. So that whole region that's pictured in the map there was under severe severe famine. Why did I say salmon?
Severe salmon. They were all swimming upstream. It was a severe salmon infestation.
I must be hungry.
The attack of the salmon.
I must be hungry.
Severe
but anyway,
famine.
anyway, severe famine.
Famine.
Severe famine. Miss Robin, thank you for
Hey,
joining us.
Robin.
Yay, the lights are on. You're not in the dark. That makes me feel
wow.
way better.
That's so weird.
Yeah, that makes me feel a whole lot better. They probably just got around to changing the timer on the lights.
Oh, yeah.
so,
And then
yeah.
the time's going to change again. So
Right.
in a couple
So,
weeks.
well, be safe.
November
and,
7th.
the Gergises are on board. So
Hey,
thanks for joining
Good
us.
to see you.
So great to see you all here. So tonight, so here we are. So let's just kind of hop right into verse 1. And
I have to figure out where I'm going to read it from.
all right.
Hold on. I got too many options.
all right.
Okay, Genesis 43, verse 1. Oh, we got to go back to the
The small screen.
the split screen. Hold
Split
on.
screen.
I got to change the shot.
All right.
Change the shot.
Ta-da.
Okay, there we go.
All right.
Hi, Jan, Catherine. Oh, you guys, it's so great to
Yeah,
see
it really
your
is.
see your typing. Thank
really
you, though. I appreciate that.
are-
When you say
I'm
hello,
very appreciative of
means
you
a
all
lot.
joining us.
that means a lot to us. And this Sunday, I'm just going to say it, and then I'll type it in here later. this Sunday, which is October
24th.
24th.
Yeah.
Dan is preaching at Calvary Cross Chapel Church in Cerritos.
Yeah.
So that's a 10:30 a.m. service. They have a streaming, so it's on Facebook as well. If you want to watch from home or if you want to come over to Cerritos and join us, I'll type the address here in the comments in a little bit. But that's where we're at this coming Sunday.
CCC in Cerritos.
10:30 a.m. And then at 5 p.m. we're here in Huntington Beach at 8101 Slater Avenue.
Yep, we're right here.
At 5 p.m.
Okay.
And also
downstairs.
Yeah, it's Lighthouse Community Church of the Nazarene is that service, and that also has a streaming component. So
it does.
You can be with us virtually, or you can come and join us.
And Miss Carolyn's on board.
Carolyn, hey Carolyn.
Hi Carolyn.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, so Genesis 43 verse 1
Here we go.
says, "Now the famine, not the salmon, the famine was severe in the land."
And that encompasses that entire region that we were talking about. Basically the Sinai Peninsula, Upper Egypt, what is commonly referred to in modern terminology as the Holy Land or Canaan, in all of that region. So it was a massive famine that God had informed Joseph was going to come, and it was going to last a very, very long time. It was going to last 7 years, which is an incredibly long time for a famine to last.
Right, remember that was all relayed in the previous chapter 40, I believe it was, where Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's dreams. 41, sorry.
So we have the overall picture of what's happening in the region. And then we know previously, in our previous studies, that Jacob had sent his sons to Egypt to obtain food, and they unknowingly encountered their younger brother Joseph, and so now they obtained grain, and they came back home, and much to their dismay, they found that their money was hidden in the bags of grain that they brought back with them.
So now they're freaking out
Their
because it's like we stole it.
Their one brother is being held captive.
Simeon.
Simeon is being held captive in Egypt.
Hey, Joji.
And they've sort of existed for a brief period of time. We don't know how long. Okay, but then verse 2 tells us
Your favorite verse is coming up in chapter 44, I think. So actually, we don't get there yet.
We don't get there
but we're
yet.
Getting there.
It's coming.
I agree. That's a really powerful verse. So verse 2 of Genesis 43. So it came about when they had finished eating the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little food."
So clearly things are getting difficult for them all the way up in Canaan. Okay, the famine is up there, and they had brought back a rather large quantity of grain.
Right, 9 bags full.
Right, but now it's running out.
Well, but poor Simeon. So they didn't rush back.
Right, Simeon's languishing.
Simeon is in prison, as far as they know. He is being treated as a prisoner.
Right.
And he's in prison this whole time.
Right.
So, we don't know, was it 6 months? Was it 12 months? We don't really know. But all we know is they certainly did not rush right back to try to try to get Simeon out of prison. They waited until their grain stores were almost depleted, and the famine was continuing. So they're in that same position that they were in before the first trip. We're all going to die if we don't go get food, go get supplies. The future is bleak, and we will all certainly die. So they waited until the future was bleak again, and now they have to have the
Jacob,
conversation.
as the
Poor Simeon.
Jacob as the patriarch of the family, so he's taking note of this, okay, and he's probably wondering why his boys are sitting around and they're not doing anything constructive, apparently. And so now he says, you know what? Go back. We got to get more food.
Right.
And I think it's kind of fascinating to me, because I think in the bigger picture here, it's like, how many of times have we been in this situation when we know there's unfinished business? Remember, Simeon's languishing away in an Egyptian prison. Food stores are getting weak. We know there's stuff we're supposed to do, and we kind of put it off and put it off and put it off, and then God's like, I didn't forget about that. You got to fix that. You got to fix that. So they're kind of backed into that corner, and we're all guilty of that. We all do it.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to make that trek, and they also, when they had returned, Jacob had said, no way, you're not taking Benjamin.
No,
so end of
no,
discussion.
yeah.
So basically, they weren't, it wasn't really all their fault, the brothers, that
Right.
they didn't rush back to get Simeon. They knew that if they didn't take Benjamin, that something bad would happen to probably all of them.
Right.
Because he was going to be their proof that they were not spies,
Right.
as Joseph had accused them of in chapter 42. But Jacob didn't want to hear or discuss any further the idea of taking Benjamin. So,
and in fact,
their hands were kind of tied.
Jacob he's in a bad place, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few verses here. He's in a really bad place, so much so that the text goes from using his godly name of Israel back to using the name of Jacob.
Yep.
So we have plenty of indicators just in what he's going to say in the next few verses, but also in how the scripture identifies him. So at this point in time, he's not acting like Israel, he's acting like Jacob.
Right.
Okay, and the text clearly indicates that.
Yeah, so over and over again, ever since he was given that name, I think it was in chapter 37,
Something
he was
like
given
that,
that name, and when he wrestled with God and his hip was now out of socket, that's when God gave him the name Israel. But the account reflects that he gets called Jacob intermittently with Israel, and it depends on his heart and where he's at. If he has the heart where he's able to see things, the situation from God's perspective, and kind of lean into God for strength, then he's referred to as Israel. But when he's kind of in his old pattern, his old ways of Jacobness, which means heel catcher, kind of conniver, manipulator, remember that's what the name Jacob means, then he's called Jacob. So it's interesting because we all do it. Like, we lean on our own strength instead of leaning into the Lord for our strength and wisdom. So thankfully God doesn't have different names. That would, and sometimes I wish he would, I would know, okay, I'm thinking about this wrong because God's calling me a different name. But that's what the text is reflecting here, why it goes back and forth. Obviously it's one person, but it's really interesting how it is written down that he's called Israel, and we're going to see that he's called Jacob right here, and then he's going to become Israel as we progress forward.
I just remember when I was a kid, like a really small kid, when I would sort of be a pain.
What? You were a pain?
Yeah.
I know you have two sisters. I know you were a pain.
I remember my mom would call me out. She would call me Hector. I don't know why. I don't know any Hectors. I have nothing against any Hectors. Because she knew it
would get your attention and it would irritate you.
But I knew when my mom called me a Hector, you're being a Hector.
Stop being a Hector.
Yeah, that it was me. I needed to fix my attitude. I don't know why I recalled that, but wouldn't it be cool if that? I mean,
So maybe God says Hector, and you're like, okay, Lord.
Okay, God, I get it.
Okay.
Yeah. It sure would be helpful.
Thinking about this all wrong.
Yeah, it sure would be helpful if that. Anyway, that's just an aside. Verse 3.
So if Dan's annoying you, feel free to call him Hector.
Yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe I put myself out there made myself a little too vulnerable. Okay.
You start getting texts that say, hey, Hector.
You know,
people are annoyed
I needed
with
to
you.
back off a little bit. Okay, verse 3.
Verse 3.
Verse 3.
I have weaponry now.
Yeah, I know.
Judah spoke to him, however, saying, the man, talking about Joseph, who they didn't know was Joseph, but was the Pharaoh-like person. The man sternly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.
So now we don't know why, if Judah is this is how he's entering into essentially negotiations with his dad. He's bringing up this very sensitive issue. He may be a little fearful himself because he's like, oh man, we got to go back there and this could be ugly. Okay. Again, poor Simeon he's kind of like, yeah.
Well, Simeon knows, dude, they put Joseph in a pit and
Right.
they sold him into slavery. So he knows that you probably can't count on your brothers to just run back and try to rescue you, break you out. You know, they're not going to risk their lives.
So
anyway,
nonetheless, Judah, who has not assumed, again, we know that Jesus comes from the line of Judah.
Right.
But at this point in time, Judah, he ain't there yet. Okay, he hasn't risen to that leadership capability yet, and he's got a pretty checkered past already.
Right. He's only the fourth born son of Jacob, so he's not, you know, Reuben is the oldest. And if you remember at the end of 42, when they came back and they told Jacob that, you know, the man wants to see Benjamin, you know, Reuben had said, well, you know, you can let me take him and you can kill my sons. 2 of my sons if I don't bring him back to you. And one of the commentators I was listening to, I think it was Damian Kyle, he says, you know, how many people in here are grandfathers? Like, this is not a good pitch, you know, like, so if I don't bring your son back, go ahead and kill 2 of your grandsons. You know, like that's not you know, so Reuben just sort of fails as the eldest to really provide good leadership. So in this chapter, Judah is stepping up to you know, begin negotiations with the dad. Again, they're in a dire straits and a bleak circumstance because all that food they brought back is now waning. You know, their supply is running low. So now they've got to have the discussion. But Judah has a different approach.
Yeah, Joji correctly points out Jesus will become the Lion of Judah, the Lion of Judah.
Yes.
And yeah. But Judah is not there yet.
Right.
Verse 4.
So verse 4, he says, if you send our brother with us, Benjamin, we will go down and buy you food. But if you do not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you.
So again, and perhaps this is to jar Jacob into his senses and saying, we are in serious trouble. You are actually inhibiting our ability to take care of our clan with your fears, not ungrounded fears, but your overly emotional and reactive fears. So he said, this is the deal. If you need us to go get food, we'll go get food. But there's a stipulation, and you've got to let go of those strings and allow us to do what we need to do. Taking Benjamin with us is what we need to do.
Right.
Okay. Verse 8.
Did you skip some?
Nope.
Oh, yes, you skipped verse 6 and 7.
Did I?
Well, I have it right here. There.
Oh, sorry.
I'm like, that's
I did skip it. I'm sorry. My bad. My bad.
So verse 6. We'll get to verse 8. So verse 6. Then Israel, now he's called Israel, Jacob is called Israel. Why did you treat me so badly by telling the man whether you still had another brother? But they said, the man specifically asked us about our relatives, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? So we answered his questions. Could we possibly know that he would say, bring your brother down?
Right. So we see, now notice here he's Israel again. He's been Jacob, now he's Israel.
Right.
But he kind of launches into them a little bit. Why did you treat me so badly? By telling him that you still had another brother. So he's kind of holding them responsible.
Right.
Okay? And so Judah just kind of lays it out. He's like, the man asked.
Right.
The man asked, you know, we're in a strange land. There's 9 of us. There's a whole Egyptian army. There's this imposing dude that's kind of controlling the food supply. He asked a question. It was probably in our best interest to answer truthfully.
Well, but the truth is, Joseph never asked them those questions. If you look at chapter 42, because I was revisiting it, what happened was Joseph saw them, he recognized them. Joseph said, where have you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan. This is 42, starting at verse 7. The land of Canaan, to buy food. But Joseph had recognized his brothers, and they didn't recognize him. Joseph remembered the dreams that he had. Joseph said, you are spies. You have come to look at undefended parts of our land.
That's right, yes.
So Joseph only accused them of being spies. Then they said, to try to convince him they weren't spies, they said in verse 10, no, my lord, but your servants we have come to buy food. And then in verse 11, we are all sons of one man. We are honest men, your servants, not spies. In verse 12, Joseph said yet to them, no, but you have come to look at undefended parts of our land. Verse 13, but they said, your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive.
Right.
They just regurgitated all of this information because they were freaking out and they were scared.
Right.
I mean, I get it, but they're kind of fibbing to their dad right here.
Yeah,
they're saying, oh, he asked us, don't you have a brother? Is your father alive? And Joseph just kept saying, you're spies. That's the only thing Joseph said. He actually never said. And then after they said all of that, then he said, I'm going to keep Simeon, or I'm going to keep you all here and send one of you to bring your younger brother back. But he never asked about their family. So I find that interesting that they're like, but Dad, he asked us.
But Dad.
So they're still in their half-truth way of living. They haven't become completely honest. That's just my take on that.
So now we go to verse 8.
Now you can go to verse 8.
There we go.
So Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, so that we may live and not die, as well as you and our little ones. I myself will take responsibility for him. You may demand him back from me. If I do not bring him back to you and present him to you, then you can let me take the blame forever. For if we have not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. So it's true, they waited a long time to have this conversation.
Right.
They could have gone down to Egypt and brought food back a couple times, but nobody wanted to have the conversation. But this time, see, like Reuben at the end of 42 said, go ahead and kill 2 of my sons if I don't bring him back to you. Judah said, not saying to kill more of the family. He's just saying, I will bear the blame my entire life. You can trust me with Benjamin's well-being.
Right.
So that's a little more appealing.
It's a little more appealing,
to Jacob.
And it's been noted by other commentators.
Oh.
Guzik said this is the first good thing we see that Judah did. Previously, he was the one who had proposed the sale of Joseph. He was the one who wronged his daughter-in-law Tamar, treating her as a harlot. Now he becomes a surety or insurance policy to guarantee Benjamin's safe return. It indicates that perhaps, although as Gay indicated, he's still lying, he's sort of having a change of heart because he's willing to offer up himself as an insurance policy for Benjamin's safety.
Right.
Verse 11.
Verse 11, then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and carry down to the man as a gift a little balsam, a little honey, labdanum, resin, and myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. And take double the money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the opening of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake.
Now, if you recall, when was it Jacob, when he met his brother Esau? This is several chapters back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he kind of did the same thing.
Oh yeah, he prepared gifts when he was first coming up to meet with Esau.
He was afraid that Esau was going to kill him.
Right.
So he...
Well, because Esau had said, if I ever see you again, I will kill you.
Yeah. So, yeah.
When they parted ways, when he went to live in Hebron.
Right. So perhaps he was employing the same strategy. And even though the land is still in severe famine, most of the things that he brings would have been items that would not necessarily foodstuffs. The nuts, the pistachios, and the almonds obviously are foodstuffs. The honey could have been, several commentators said it could have been almost like a jam or a marmalade made from grapes. So it's not necessarily bee honey, but even if it is bee honey, that's something that could be collected from the wild. And all the other things are spices and fragrances and things that could be used as perfumes. And again, keeping in mind that Egypt had a thriving embalming practice, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would rely heavily upon spices and resins and things of that nature. So these would have been appealing gifts to bring into the land. They're not available in Egypt, so that would have given them, as one commentator said, high diplomatic value. Okay.
Sort of like a sweeten the deal.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
give them sort of a priority. Like these people are coming in
Yeah.
with these really rare gifts for the land of Egypt. The other commentator I listened to said, and maybe you're gonna bring it up later, but it's interesting because when Joseph was sold into slavery, the Ishmaelites that were taking him to Egypt, this is what they were carrying.
Right.
They were carrying
right.
many of these exact same items. So
Exactly.
it's just interesting that's the same, they are actually trying to go get Simeon out of slavery, and they're afraid that they'll become slaves, but it's all associated with these same items, which would have the same scent. Like the last time Joseph would have smelled these items was when he was in that train, that group going to Egypt with the Ishmaelite traders.
Right.
So the last time he would have been a slave when he smelled these and experienced these items. Probably.
Exactly. Or he was seeing a caravan carrying these items. And then, of course, in verse 12, and he says, take double the money in your hand and take back the money that was returned to you, plus an additional sum of money. And we'll come back to that point because it does have some significance. Okay. Let's see. Let's skip over those and go to verse 13.
Oh, hey, May. I see that May is watching, and it told me, Linda and May.
Oh, cool.
It's showing me on my phone, so I don't know.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, you guys.
So
verse 13.
Verse
13 says,
let's see. There we go.
take your brother also. So he's giving them permission to take Benjamin. And arise, return to the man. The man.
They're still calling him the man.
The man. And there's a comedian that said that all the time. So now I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
Oh, and may God Almighty, El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one, grant you compassion in the sight of the man, so that he will release to you your other brother, Simeon. Like, they never say Simeon's name, poor guy.
Right.
You know, the other guy, get him back. He was a hard worker. And Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my sons, I am bereaved. So it's sort of like saying, it is well with my soul.
Well, kind of.
Kind of.
Not
like,
really.
You know,
he's kind of like, this is kind of a negative.
I know, but it's sort of like,
Right.
well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But as Judah had aptly said this time around, Judah said, if you recall a couple of verses ago, if we don't go with Benjamin, we will get nothing, and we will probably end up as slaves. If we don't go at all, then we're all going to die.
Everyone's going to die.
All of your grandkids, all of our families, like it will be the end of the family, the line,
Right.
and everything.
So even in his dismay, and it's abundant, even in his dismay, Jacob, there's a bit of a glimmer because and may God Almighty, he calls God, he uses the name El Shaddai here, okay? The all-sufficient one, grant you compassion and sight. So even in his despair and his dismay, Jacob / Israel still has a little spark there that he calls out, or he says, and may God Almighty, but it's actually he's calling out, may God Almighty, El Shaddai, grant you compassion. So so that there's a little shadow of hopes, or a little light, I should say, in his shadowy grief, if you will. So his faith is almost extinguished, but it's not. Verse 15.
So the men took this gift, and they took double the money in their hand and Benjamin. Then they sat out and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph, the man.
He stood before Joseph. So kind of a summary verse. I mean, obviously, several days to several weeks transpired on this journey. They have double the money, okay, and they have Benjamin with them, okay, and they make the arduous trek at least 200, perhaps 300 miles or more, okay, depending on which route they had to take because of climate, bandits, etc., etc. They make this journey, and now they're standing before Joseph, whom they only know as the man, the overseer, the second in command of Israel, or I'm sorry, of Egypt, and they're it's a gamble. There's still a lot of apprehension, a lot of things that need to be tied up. Several commentators put it this way: in addition to the guilt burden placed upon them by their father Jacob, oh my gosh, you're gonna have my youngest son's gonna die, and I'm gonna just wither away and die myself. In addition to that, okay, the 9 older brothers also had 3 other serious problems that they needed to solve in order to survive this trek, this whole drama, this whole episode. 1, they had to explain the money that showed up in their bags. Okay, they had to somehow convince the man that they were not thieves, and that they really honestly don't know how the money got there. The second issue they had to deal with was they had to attempt to have Simeon released from prison. They at least had to try and get their brother back. Okay, so again, and then the third major elephant sort of in the room was that they needed to protect Benjamin. Okay, they didn't know why at this point why Joseph wanted Benjamin, they didn't know why the man wanted their younger brother to be there. And I'm sure there was lots of speculation that he was gonna sell him into slavery. Who knows what transpired in their heads during this multi-week journey. But these 3 problems are still looming before them, and they don't know how to solve them. Oh yeah, this was fascinating. They took commentators said they took double the money with them to Egypt to buy grain, and in doing so buy the Egyptian leaders' favor. Since 10 brothers went to Egypt and they took double money, there were 20 units of money, 10 being Benjamin too. 20 units of money. This answered exactly the 20 pieces of silver that they accepted for the sale of Joseph. The words, this is what I found fascinating. The words in the Hebrew, silver and money, are the same word. It's the same word. I love how God brings everything full circle. They sold Joseph some 20 odd years ago for 20 pieces of silver that they split up amongst themselves. Okay. Now they're going back to Egypt with 20 units of money to attempt to buy their brother's freedom, to attempt to buy their survival of their clan, to attempt to buy to survive. So then Genesis 37:28 recounts that the Midianite merchantmen passed away, and they pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Verse 16.
When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his house steward, "Bring the men into the house, and slaughter an animal, and make preparations, for the men are to dine with me at noon." So the man did as Joseph said, and brought the men to Joseph's house.
Okay. So Joseph, he sees them coming, or he recognizes them amongst the crowd, and he sees that Benjamin is with them, or who he perceives as Benjamin. Okay, again, when he saw Benjamin last, he was just a boy. He sees him, and so he instructs his house steward, who would have been over all of his household. He says, "Bring these guys to my house and make a meal." Okay, make a meal for them for noon. Okay, and so they're brought to Joseph's house. Now, this would have been probably terrifying to these guys. This probably would have been like, oh no, He's singling us out. He's drawing us away from the marketplace. This can't be good.
Right.
This
Now
can't
now
be
you're
good.
thinking, well, because I was thinking two things. I was thinking, like, when Joseph was first put in prison, he was in prison at Potiphar's house.
Yeah.
Like, there was a prison, special prison that he was in right
Right,
there.
right.
And so I'm sure they're thinking also, like, well, they could be getting carted off to his house, but
Right.
they could be being thrown in a dungeon, you know,
Right, right.
at that location.
They might not have known that, but as they approached his premises, they might have perceived that.
I'm sure
Oh,
it's a
no.
huge palace
Yeah.
with all sorts of guards and things, you know. So you'd be
Right.
like, are we really going there to dine? Or are we really, you know, they might
To
have
die.
to die,
Are
or
we
to
going to
to
dine
die.
or are we going to die?
Exactly. Yeah,
So-
for sure. So the other thing is, so this as an analogy with this and the prodigal son from Luke 15.
Yeah.
You know, where like Joseph saw them from a distance and then
Right.
said, prepare a meal. And so that's an interesting analogy, you know, or,
Yeah.
you know, a likeness there of the two situations, you know.
Yeah. Manny joined us.
Hey,
Hey,
Manny.
Manny. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see
So-
you.
Good. And so this speculation, our speculation, is somewhat confirmed by verse 18.
Verse 18, it says, now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. They said, it is because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we're being brought in, so that he may attack us and overpower us and take us as slaves with our donkeys.
Okay.
So they were concerned about the animals. That's good.
Right.
Oh my gosh, don't make a slave of my donkey.
Oh, no. I can think it was Pinocchio.
They just want to steal my car, you know,
Right.
steal my truck.
They're afraid. So they're afraid. They're being pulled away from the marketplace or from the warehouse, the storehouse, where undoubtedly there are probably many people, lots of activity, and they're being singled out and they're being pulled away from that. And as they approach Joseph's house, they're speculating amongst themselves. They're like, see, the money was a setup. The money was a setup so they would have an excuse to enslave us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, we are in deep trouble. They're going to overpower us, and we and our animals are going to be made slaves of. Okay, verse 19.
So they approached Joseph's house steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house and said, oh, my lord, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, and it happened when we came to the campsite that we opened our sacks, and behold, each man's money was in the opening of his sack, our money in full. So we have brought it back in our hand. Like, here you go. We weren't trying to rip you off. We're coming with paying that debt that we owe. So they're showing turning of the heart to try to be upfront and honest.
Trying to,
which
and,
is
and
interesting.
They speak to the steward. They recognize that the steward is a man of at least at that particular household, of great influence, and they're thinking, maybe if we can just like quickly spit out our story, maybe he'll go to bat for us. We need an ally. We're strangers in a strange land. We need allies. We need something. This guy has influence and power. Let's tell him quickly. Let's tell him quickly before they cart us off into prison. You know, attempting to get their story out, finding somebody who would be sympathetic to their cause, if you will. Okay, they're desperate. They are utterly desperate at this point.
Right.
Okay, and so they tell the steward. Okay. And then in verse 22, they continue to explain why we're back. Why are we back?
And we have also brought down other money in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. But the steward said to them, peace be to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. Your money was in my possession. Then he brought Simeon out to them.
Wow.
So
Talk about a turn of events, right?
Peace is the Hebrew word shalom.
Shalom.
He actually used like the Hebrew word.
He used the
This
Hebrew.
is an Egyptian guy.
Right.
So you know that he's really close to Joseph.
Right.
He's Joseph's right-hand man, or he's definitely in Joseph's inner circle of servants, because he's saying things that he would have heard Joseph say.
Right.
Because he's not a Hebrew.
So here's a glimmer into the fact that Joseph is a man of character. He's a man of God, because rather than him becoming and I don't mean it in a negative way, but becoming more Egyptianized, if you will.
Right.
He has influence upon the people of his household to the point where the steward, by his words, uh, is indicating that he believes in the God of the Hebrew Bible.
Your mom's watching.
He believes in the God of the Hebrews.
Hey,
So
Carol.
Joseph had influence upon his household rather than the other way around, which speaks highly of his character. And we'll see it come into play here even more poignantly in just a few verses here.
Mm-hmm.
But the steward literally changes the atmosphere of this encounter.
Right.
The 10 brothers are terrified. They're terrified of what's going to transpire, and they're attempting to plead their case and find a sympathetic ally. And then the very person that they spew their cause to says, "I know, it's all good.
Right. Your money was in my possession," which indicates that he's the one who put it back.
Right. Right.
So he's like, "I know all about it.
I know all about it.
It's okay.
It's okay." And then to further indicate his goodwill or his good intent, he brings Simeon out to them. Wow.
Right. Oh, wow. And by the way, here's your brother who's been in prison, or you left him behind here. I mean, because we kept him as a prisoner, but he probably was treated quite nicely, or he wasn't treated as a slave or a prisoner during this time. But it doesn't really say how he was treated, but
exactly,
we have every indication from Joseph's behavior in this chapter that he was probably taken care of.
He was not mistreated.
Right.
So he was not mistreated.
He wasn't treated like a typical prisoner.
So the very thing that they were dreading and unable to solve is being solved for them, even as they sort of babble a little bit. Okay. Hey, Miss Lori, thanks for joining us.
Lori.
Okay, so we're about halfway through our study, but we're so glad that you did.
Say hi to your mom.
Hey, Mom. Okay. Hi, Mom. All right. Verse 24.
Verse 24. Then the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkeys feed. It's very important to take care of your animals. So they prepared the gift for Joseph's arrival at noon, for they had heard that they were to eat a meal there.
So at first they did not know why they were being summoned. They were thinking the worst.
Right.
Okay. They were.
We're gonna see the man again, and he's gonna accuse us of stealing the grain we bought the first time, and then we're gonna get thrown in prison. So,
can you imagine? Like,
oh, by the way, you're gonna have a sit-down meal.
You're thinking the worst. You're thinking the absolute worst, and then in an instant, everything is changing beyond what you would dare even imagine. So much so that the steward brings them into Joseph's house, and again, keeping in mind that Joseph is the second in command over all of Egypt. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a big deal. This is a White House dinner. This is
a royal gala.
Right.
This isn't just I'm gonna get some KFC and throw it over to your guys.
Right. And not only do they get invited into Joseph's palace, probably more likely.
Right.
Okay. They're treated as honored guests. These foreigners, these beggars, essentially. They're not begging; they're coming to buy food, but they're desperate, and now they're having their feet washed, which is a sign of hospitality. They're being watered and refreshed, and even their animals are being taken care of.
Right.
So now they're like, "Oh yeah, Dad said to give this gift. Maybe it'll win us favor." Like they're already winning favor, but like,
right.
"Oh yeah, we've got this gift. We've got this gift." So they start preparing the spices and the nuts and
pistachios, and almonds. Makes me hungry.
And the honey and the things of that nature. They prepare the gift so they can present it to Joseph.
So we're going to see in a few more verses, but this idea that a servant is washing their feet is also just really significant, because culturally, Hebrews, and especially shepherd type of people, were considered really unclean and dirty, and they were considered very lower class.
Yes.
to the Egyptians. Like the Egyptians thought they were abhorrent.
Yes, and we'll
So
see
then
that.
disgusting. So for them to say a servant's going to wash your feet is really significant.
It is just taken all of their sensibilities and their cultural mores and all that, is just flipping it on its ear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is exactly what Jesus would do a thousand years later.
Right.
He would do exactly that. He would twist everything around. Okay, and we'll see that here in a minute. Now, verse 26.
When Joseph came home, noon, remember?
Noonish.
Noonish. Ish, probably. He could be late. It's okay. He's the ruler.
You want him to be late because you're always late.
Joseph was probably late.
Yeah.
So anyway, Joseph came home. They brought into their house to them the gift which was in their hand, and they bowed down to the ground before him. Then he asked them about their welfare and said, "Is your old father well, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" So now this is the first time Joseph actually is saying that sentence, although they said
Right.
he said that before. So anyway,
But I underlined underlined the verse about they bowed down to the ground before him. Hello.
does that sound familiar?
Does that ring a bell?
Like the dreams that the teenage 17-year-old Joseph
Right,
had, remember?
right. That the teenager in his multicolored coat, his daddy's
This is
favorite.
the second time, because the first time they came to Egypt, the same thing happened. They bowed down, and Joseph remembered the dream. So, of course, these guys still don't know who Joseph is.
Right.
But yet again, they're the dream is coming true, and it's being reinforced. That God, that was not just some ego-driven dream that a 17-year-old had. It was actually a dream that God gave him.
If
a
God
vision.
says something is going to pass,
It will
it is
happen.
going to pass.
Mhm.
That should fill us with tremendous, tremendous hope.
Right.
It should also fill us with a sense of urgency, and it's like, because he says that bad things are on the horizon, and you need to be right with him. So we need to take his word seriously.
Right.
So then in verse 27, as Gay said, Joseph begins to inquire about their father, okay, asking if he's still alive, and they still haven't clued in yet. They still don't have a clue. And again, they can be forgiven. They think Joseph is a slave somewhere or
dead.
possibly dead.
Well, they
Okay.
told him they thought he was dead.
Right,
So.
and he's dressed in traditional or not just Egyptian garb, but royal Egyptian garb.
Plus, they
Okay.
wear makeup and they shave all their hair off, and so they have a wig. And remember, he was speaking, and probably still was at this point, speaking to them through an interpreter. So he's speaking Egyptian. He's using a harsh, gruff voice. So Joseph is definitely wanting to disguise himself at this
Right,
point. He's
at this
wanting to
point.
stay hidden. So they're definitely not to blame for not recognizing him, because
Right.
Joseph is making it very difficult for them to recognize.
Yeah, Joji says he became a shrewd businessman after his years in Egypt. He needed something to hold on so his brothers would come back. Yes, indeed. Indeed, we're going to see this transpire. This drama is not over even as we get to the conclusion
Such a
tonight.
compelling story.
Verse 28.
Account. In verse 28, and they said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." Then they bowed down again in homage. And as he raised his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, again, this is his full brother.
Yes.
He and Benjamin are full brothers. He said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" Then he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son."
So Joseph is implying that he's a bit older than he really is. He's calling Benjamin his son, a term of endearment, not uncommon, not unheard of. But he's not invoking the Egyptian gods, which were prevalent everywhere in that culture. He's invoking the God of the Bible. May God be gracious to you, indicating where his heart was at that moment, okay, where it's always been, actually.
Right. He's been longing for his brothers, all of his brothers and his family, but he knew that God had put him in this place and this position. But the Hebrew there in that sentence, some of the translations say his mercy grew warm for him. and it actually says where it says he's deeply moved, or maybe that's in the next
It's in the
section.
next verse.
The next verse where it says he's deeply moved. Another translation is his mercies grew warm, and the Hebrew there actually, yeah, is actually says his mercy grew warm for him. So that's just a cool phrase. Instead of just saying he was deeply moved, like
Right.
his mercy in his heart is just bubbling over,
Right, right.
So that's in verse 30. Joseph then hurried out, for he was deeply stirred or deeply moved over his brother, and he looked for a place to weep. So he entered his chamber and wept there. And then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, "Serve the meal." So he keeps this facade going, he keeps his disguise going. When he got too emotional, he left quickly so that they wouldn't see him get that emotional.
Right.
Of course, again, he's speaking Egyptian gruffly and everything, and I'm sure he sounded a little bit choked up when he said that phrase, "May God be gracious to you." And then he stormed out. So they'd be thinking, "Oh my gosh, you're on eggshells the whole time. You're thinking,
Right.
This guy's upset about something now. Like, Benjamin, what'd you do? What'd you say?"
Right. They may
They're
not have
probably
spoken
thinking,
Egyptian, but they're kind of terrified
yeah,
because
because
he
they
just
wouldn't
stormed out.
understanding everything,
Right.
right?
So, but in actuality, he is just beyond emotion.
Right.
Okay. And yes, Joji. Yeah. Wiersbe, the commentator Wiersbe, says essentially the same thing that Joji just said. Joseph's sensitive heart was a miracle of God's grace.
Mm-hmm.
For years, dead Egyptian idols and the feudal worship given to them had surrounded Joseph. Okay, again, keeping in mind, ancient Egypt had well over 2,000 gods, little g gods that they worshipped, and their entire society, well, for the most part, the upper echelons of their society was devoted, literally devoted to appeasing their gods and preparing for death and trying to make sure that they had everything, all their ducks in a row, so to speak, for facing their gods upon their death. Okay, and Joseph is intimately involved in that. He's second in command under Pharaoh, so obviously he interacted with Pharaoh, we can assume, on a fairly regular basis. Okay, Pharaoh himself was considered a god. Everything around him, Joseph would have had access to the upper echelons of the priesthood and so on and so forth. He would have been immersed in that culture, and yet the culture did not affect him.
Right.
Beyond his external appearance and perhaps the tongue that he spoke and such, but his heart was still inclined towards God and towards his family.
Right.
So it's a huge testament to Joseph, and it's a huge reminder for us to be in the world but not of the world.
Like it says in Romans.
Like it says in Romans, yeah.
Right.
To be in the world.
We are to be in this
in
world.
The world.
Do not be transformed, do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewing. Allow the Lord to transform you by the renewing of your mind.
Yep. Yeah. So we see this. We literally see this in Joseph.
This is a very, very great example of that.
Huge example, because we see the same thing in Jesus, and Joseph is often likened as a prototype or I can't think of the word right now, an archetype of Christ, right? And rightly so. There are many things about him. Okay, and of course we say, well, yeah, if I were Jesus, I could do those things too. But here we have Joseph, just a man, just an extraordinary, but just a man, not God man, just a man, and he is able to do that. So we have hope.
Right.
We have hope.
Right.
Okay. Verse 32.
Then they served him by himself, Benjamin, and Joseph's brothers by themselves. No,
Joseph.
Served Joseph by himself.
Right.
So Joseph said, "Serve the meal." So then they served him by himself, and Joseph's brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians.
So
I was in a choir that was called the Abomination Choir.
So So here we
Just
have
side note.
a strange verse. It's especially to our 21st century uh, um, sensibilities. But one thing that literally across the board, all of the historians and the commentators that I looked up, they all said this, that ancient Egypt was one of the most segregated cultures on earth. And even though Joseph was incredibly high ranking, and even though he had been immersed in their culture, and even though externally he carried himself and spoke the Egyptian languages and such, he was still considered a non-Egyptian. He was still a Hebrew, and therefore the upper echelon Egyptians would not eat with him. He was not Egyptian, and therefore he could not share a meal with them. It's said that the high priests of Egypt would not even eat food that was not grown in Egypt. They would, so all of these things that the brothers have brought,
Almonds and
the high
pistachio
priest,
nuts.
nope, wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't use utensils that were not made in Egypt. They just no. And there's so many things that we could go on and on and on about it with this verse, just about the prejudices and the attitudes that they showed. The fact remains, Joseph, even as his high rank, had to eat by himself, and partly because of his high rank, he had to eat by himself.
I was gonna say, I mean, that's part of it. Like,
Yeah.
he was second only to Pharaoh,
Right.
so he would also be at his own table
Right,
because he was the upper class,
right.
and there really wasn't anyone around him that was equivalent, So, but also, I don't know if, I mean, it's true. I mean, he was Hebrew, so they could have not wanted to eat with him because of that.
Right.
But in this situation, in his own household, it's sort of like the Queen of England. Like, she dined alone a lot, unless she had,
Right.
I mean, only certain people could sit at her table, and they weren't like with her. They were at the other end, or you know what I mean? Like, so because of his status, his position, he would also be served separately and everything, So,
But this will play out later on when the Hebrews do come to Egypt, and we see that they are segregated,
right?
And they don't intermix easily. They don't intermix with the Egyptians. They, for 400 years, they remain a separate people, and this attitude, this idea, is partly responsible for that. God used that.
Right.
God used that to keep the Hebrews as a separate nation, if you will.
Right.
So, but I love what was brought up by some commentators, the contrast. So the Egyptians would not eat with Joseph, even though his ranking was the highest in the land. Okay, and they definitely would not eat with, as Gay said, those shepherd Hebrews, right? But through Jesus Christ, we're told in Galatians, in the New Testament, there is neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave, nor free, nor male, nor female. We are all one in Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that contrast. I love how again, God just turns everything up on its ear.
Well, and I just think it's interesting, before we move on, that this idea of cultural segregation and racism, thinking another type of people are abhorrent to you or an abomination, or that has been around since mankind began, really.
Yeah.
So it's not something that started with the Mayflower, or started with it's not a creation of white versus black. It's innate, unfortunately, in humankind's sin nature. It's not something that,
right.
I mean, and there's always going to be, always has been, culturally, people who were slaves, people who were servants, people who were of different classes, and then there's always been like animosity and rejection and discrimination between those classes, or of the same ethnicity. And then people of different ethnicities here's an account of it. They would
Right.
not eat together. They wouldn't eat with, so it's just very interesting to me. Like people say, oh, that book was written so long ago, that
Right.
Bible
It's
book.
irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. I'm like, are you kidding me? Or are we not experiencing a lot of this kind of mentality today? It's very interesting to me that this is just an example of how far back that goes, and God isn't condoning it here. So just because it's
Right.
in the Bible, and we said this back in, earlier in Genesis, it just keeps coming up, because it's a cultural thing. So it's recorded that these things occurred and it happened and people behaved this way, but it does not say that God said it should be so.
Right.
So just
Exactly.
so we're clear on that, it's just interesting to me that it records that these kind of behaviors and attitudes, what is causing a bunch of turmoil today in our society, it existed back then as well in
Right.
Joseph's day.
Verse 33.
Verse 33. Now they were seated before him, from the firstborn according to his birthright to the youngest according to his youth, and the men looked at one another in astonishment.
Indeed, how could they know? How could they know? And it's no wonder they were filled with astonishment, because statistically the odds of a stranger arranging the brothers in birth order, the odds of that happening are 1 in 40 million.
Right.
Okay.
Somebody even said it's actually 1 in 39,917,000. So basically 40 million.
Right. So there are 39,917 possible combinations of arranging these brothers.
11 people, in
the correct order. There's
the odds are very, very, very high that would not happen by chance.
There's a whole lot of ways of doing it wrong, in other
yeah.
words. And Joseph got it right. And they were astonished. And they're like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And this will come into play in a little bit later. Okay. And then verse 34, and we're going to end here. Okay.
Then he took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank freely with him.
This was a test. This was definitely a test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Joseph intentionally gives Benjamin a greater portion to see how the other brothers react. Remember, his coat was a coat of many colors, maybe 5 colors. We don't know. We don't know why he chose 5 times as much food, but clearly it's an
right.
obvious abundance that the other brothers did not notice, and they're drinking and freely and eating with him, and they're not jealously guarding. So Joseph is observing their change of heart.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to see how they would react when Benjamin was clearly favored. Again, keeping in mind how they reacted to him when he had a special coat.
Right, when he was Dad's favorite.
Right.
Yeah, so he wanted to see if there was a change in their heart. So I find that really interesting. My thought about this section was, reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
We get often, and as Christians, it's even more pressed upon us that, if there's been some kind of animosity or an issue between you and your brother, Matthew 18 is what's referred to. You should, you need to reconcile. You need to take the steps of Matthew 18. And I find it very interesting. So here's an example of Joseph. At the very beginning, when his brothers came to Egypt, he had the opportunity to say, hey, it's me, hey, and, let's have this talk and let's reconcile. But does he do that? No. He actually puts them through many tests.
Right.
Sending them all home and keeping Simeon, that was a test.
Yep.
To have them bring back Benjamin, see if they would really do that, or would they just abandon their brother like they abandoned him. And then now at this meal, he's showing favoritism to Benjamin, which he knows is probably his dad's favorite since he's gone. So he knows his dad, so he knows that. So he's testing them. And so to me, this is really interesting because it's a good example of, yes, we should examine our hearts. If there's been, animosity or something wrong has happened, we should definitely examine our hearts, and we should But you shouldn't just jump back into a relationship at the same level
Right.
until you know it's a safe relationship.
Good point.
Until you know those are safe people. Has there been a change of heart?
Right.
Is God telling you to do that? And because sometimes there's people out there that are not safe people.
Right.
So it's very interesting when the idea of reconciliation in ministry, it gets pushed to the forefront and kind of pushed onto people and situations a lot, which I think this account says to me, maybe we should proceed cautiously in some of those situations, and maybe we shouldn't feel bad if we feel there needs to be some testing of their heart.
Yep. We'll pick up the narrative because the drama continues to unfold and the testing continues. Like Gay said, the testing will continue. Joseph wants to make sure. Okay. And so we'll pick that up in chapter 44 next week.
Right. And so as you are preparing, read ahead in 44, but look at Psalm 103. In the middle of that psalm, there's just a really cool reference to Joseph. And so that's just really something to meditate on for this week until we see you guys. Maybe we'll see you Sunday at Cerritos, or we'll see you Sunday evening here in Huntington Beach. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.
Great. Blessings.